I'm Louis Moroni, and this is Constraints the Podcast from Hi-Fi Handiwork, a 20-episode series. Each episode is a chat with a guest from a creative industry about a project obstacle they've experienced, viewed through the lens of project management's three constraints of scope, time, and budget. Further insights and commentary can be found in the show notes. We hope you enjoy the program. Often for people with a creative first passion, the balance between pursuing that passion and making ends meet is precarious. The options are well known and the choice depends on various factors, including the person's risk threshold, sun sign, city or country, their support systems, prevailing markets, and many others. Some will find a humdrum job to pay the bills and satisfy their creative appetite outside of work. Others may be satisfied with a job that is creative adjacent enough to their passion to satisfy both. There is the starving artist who may pick up odd jobs or work just enough to keep themselves sheltered and fed, but spend most of their time producing works. Then there are the entrepreneurs, those creatives who hire themselves for their dream job by becoming business owners, investing a large chunk of their time and money into creating space in their life where they can create, untethered to the demands or expectations of anyone else. My guests today are of the entrepreneurial ilk, meeting as students of fashion in the 20th century at what is now known as Toronto Metropolitan University. It's there they began a lifetime partnership of creation, starting their own label, Mercy, the result of, quote, extensive sourcing of historical mills through Ireland, the UK, and Japan, giving each garment an edge, a sentimental feeling, end quote. And like true entrepreneurs, in 2011 they employed their keen eye for quality and style towards the creation of a boutique shop on Queen Street West in Toronto. You'll know it by the highly original and mesmerizing window displays, with a curated collection of labels from around the world. Finally, as designers with honed technical skills, they have expanded their business model and services to provide costume design and production in the film and commercial sectors, making them triple threat fashionistas of creation, curation, and collaboration. I half suspect that their performance in today's episode might uncover a fourth threat, this time to my own entrepreneurial endeavor of podcasting. But let's find out by welcoming Jennifer Halchuk and Richard Lyle to Constraints.
Hi, Louis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, Louis.
Hello, Richard.
Happy to be here, too.
Okay, so look, we're going to jump right in here. I'm going to take off my glasses, and we're going to find out what project you have come today to discuss.
Well, I think we're going to cover quite a few projects in the different branches of our career tree. We have done global costuming campaigns for Estee Lauder under MAC Cosmetics, and that took up probably about 12 years while we were still designing our Mercy collection. So everywhere in our career, cash flow has been a major struggle. Mm-hmm. And we've always kept pies in the air to feed each business. There's never been a crisis where you ever thought that one business was going to fold when times were tough. For example, with COVID, when we were in lockdown and our boutique was shuttered, it was the perfect opportunity to bring in Netflix costume work. And while that store was shuttered, we were busy in the back creating costume builds. And it was actually an incredible opportunity that helped us pay the store rent.
So your project here is really your business model, which wasn't from the beginning.
No.
So at some point, you probably felt that you were at threat. Like when you started off, you started with Mercy.
Yes.
Correct? And did the expansion outside of Mercy to your store, was that a result of wanting to start putting pies in the air? Is that the way you said, pies in the air?
I think that when we started doing the clothing line, it was at a really amazing opportunity in fashion where there were very few freelance designers like Richard and myself. And we sort of broke apart from the current fashion runway show scene and started doing our own guerrilla style fashion shows.
Did you know at the time that that opportunity was there, or did it just naturally?
That opportunity came in Richard Lyle.
I feel like I should speak now.
Yeah.
Because
All right.
Okay.
no one knows I'm here.
Yeah, I would love to hear you. I'd love to hear you.
I don't
speak.
even know what we should, but how we should talk about it is like there was like an order in how it happened. There's the creation of Mercy by Jennifer. There was this order in which things led one to another.
Mhm.
So it was like Mercy the label, and then Mercy the wholesale, and then all of a sudden Gaspard comes along the way, and at the same time we were doing that work with Estee Lauder. But I know like the point of this podcast is to talk about the scope and the challenges.
Yeah, we're
Right.
looking at. I mean, we're
Because I
going to
wanna-
be a little
I-
flexible
yeah, 'cause
here,
I
but we
wanna-
want
I-
to
'cause
pinpoint. But
I want to say where the inspiration, because when you talk about like the restraint, right? Like
the constraint,
the
yeah,
constraint of is like
budget, time.
budget, and that I think has always been an underlining thing in
Mhm.
the career when it was beginning as Mercy and to where we are now. Is always being controlled by money. Like, so when Jennifer was talking about these guerrilla style fashion shows, what was great about it was the fact that we did have these restraints, like this budgetary confinement, whatever the word would
right.
be. But that was like a place of inspiration. How can I prove everyone wrong? Because everyone said you had to have money.
Right.
And now the industry that we're in is very much driven by people who have the money. And you, when we were younger, it was the 90s or whatever it was, the early 2000s. It was like, oh, we can compete with the money because we have the ideas and we have the physical strength to do everything. We'll just do everything. Now, at like the age we are, I think that sunset has occurred. But we still are driven. Like if someone says, here's a pile of money, how like inspired and driven are you going to be? Because it's like easy, oh, I'll just buy that, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
But if it's like, well, here, nothing,
Right.
you have to, it's Rumpelstiltskin. You have to spin gold from straw.
So I'm going to take you back in time then.
Does any of that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense.
Does it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
'Cause
now
you
we're
can
going
be
to
honest.
synthesize what you both spoke about, because
Okay.
you met here, and
Yeah.
by here I mean we're actually sitting in studios at Toronto Metropolitan.
But we never
University.
met in Ryerson.
You never met in Ryerson.
We overlapped, but never knew each other.
Oh, interesting. And
But-
so it was you met as graduates.
Yes.
Okay, and you both recognized each other's passion for fashion.
And
Passion for fashion.
Mm-hmm.
risk taking and trying things the hard way.
Okay, and go
I want to
ahead.
say something too, because
Mhm.
we sort of met like by accident at the fashion incubator. It was like an accidental, meeting really. And I had just returned from London, England, and when I came back to Toronto from London, having worked in the industry slightly there, it was so ruly here. There were so many like rules. Everyone was following rules, and you couldn't like step out of that constraint and do your own thing. So when we did our own thing in the form of those guerrilla fashion shows, I think we pissed off people because we were like, oh, hey, you know what? You don't need billions of dollars to be part of this scene to pay into the establishment. You can just do it yourself in a laneway in between two buildings on Wellington Street. And that's exactly what we did.
So this is interesting because in a way, your constraint even wasn't money, because you could do what you wanted to do, and it wasn't time because you had all the time. The actual constraint here was kind of scope, because you were there was a pressure to stay within a certain bound. And what would have been the expectations back then?
To be a part of the system, to pay X number of dollars to go on the runway just like everybody else.
Maybe also follow the hierarchy of who it was at the time.
Right. You had to follow the steps to get
and
the
going
success.
back to my experience in London, it was like, oh, you wanted to get into British Vogue. It was like, oh, you have something. Oh, you got something great. Oh, well, send us down the piece of clothing. It wasn't. You had to know someone. There was like no needing to know anyone.
Right.
They just wanted the great piece of clothing for the picture.
So
and here it was like, it felt like you had to know someone. You had to be connected. You couldn't, like, your creativity was not enough.
Are you okay if we continue down this road? Like, I kind of
Yes.
feel like we've
Yeah.
got our project.
Because I have
I
a
don't know.
great example.
Okay, well, why don't you give us that?
So what we started doing after our first show was taking location scouting expeditions to see where are the coolest unused spaces in the city where we can go to the city of Toronto and ask them to donate it so we can do a show.
And by the way, can we talk years here? Like what?
96 to 98.
Yeah, but I don't think that's when that show happened. I feel like it was post 9/11.
Somewhere around there.
It was like
So one of the
9/11, post 9,
Yeah.
someone right there.
Okay,
It was
but
like,
turn of the century-ish.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like it was,
I think one of the most
20 years ago.
successful but
Mhm.
biggest challenge was in a salt shed next to an abattoir
on Wellington Street.
Wellington Street. So you had, and it was getting to be, I think, middle October, and there was a cold spell. So our challenges were obviously money, but it was also the smell of the abattoir. How do you have models changing? There was no heat. What are you doing with that salt shed to make it a spectacular scene? And how do you get people to come?
So go back and answer all those
So
questions.
we went to the city of Toronto and
Yeah,
we said, we really love this location. It was a beehive salt shed.
Is it still there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was two of them, and that building that we're talking about is now Waterworks. So this is the original.
okay.
Yeah.
I think they used to fix like fire hydrants in that building, and there was this guy from the city, and he was like, "Hey, yeah, you want to use the salt shed for
Sure.
your show? Go ahead." So we went there and looked at it, and it was super damp and wet because salt attracts like moisture into it. There were swallows flying around in it. There was no electricity in it. They actually got the street cleaners to actually clean the inside of it for us, and then it was just this empty shell. We did have $1,000 given to us by what do you call those people, like patrons?
Patrons.
Yeah.
And that
Uh-huh.
would have been Judy and Joyce of Comrags. They gave us $1,000. So with that, we
wow.
bought a whole bunch of sod, rolls of sod. That was going to be the runway in the form of a cross. We had to actually make our own wire. We went to like Wolf Electrical and bought like wire and sockets and light bulbs, and actually had to make wire it ourselves. Like if you saw a picture,
Because
you
was-
would understand. And
Right.
then one thing that we remembered is at some point Toronto Fashion Week was at the Masonic Temple, and we were upstairs in like an unused room of, I guess, the Grand Hoo-Ha, whatever it was, and there was all these amazing vintage school chairs. So we asked the Masonic Temple people or whoever was managing that thing, "Hey, can we have the chairs?" But we had to hand carry them down from like the attic
Uh-huh.
down onto the street, rent a car, blah, blah, blah. And if you could have been there, and the point about the smell of the abattoir, we went to this company called Osmosis that used to be on Queen, and they
Essential oils
made a handmade essential oil
to
thing
mask the smell of the abattoir.
Anyways,
Wow. And they came in and they sort of did that
No,
treatment, or
no,
they gave
no.
you
They
the...
gave us the special
yeah, and we
And it
oil
worked?
recipe.
we rubbed
and
it
it
on
was
the backs
beautiful.
of the chairs.
Oh.
I think that what we were kind of good at, do you want to admit to this? I think what we're kind of good at is like slightly pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Well, it's marketing.
yeah, I guess so.
marketing and fashion.
We got
it's
people
wool,
got
eyes.
people to drink tap water with like a couple of drops of rose water in it and some petals, in a water cooler. And it was like, "Oh, what is this drink?" It's like, oh.
So was that the first? That wasn't the first of your guerrilla.
No.
Were
No.
you? So at that point, were you? What was the buzz? Was there the buzz about Richard and Jennifer at that point?
Yeah, because we sold to Barney's. We were at Holt Renfrew. We had a Japanese distributor by that time. And we were mavericks in press releases. By that time, I think we had done 3 or 4 really cool fashion shows. One in an old roller rink, one at the St. Lawrence Market where we got old sports equipment and put the garments on sport. We did another one on Young and Queen where the people looked like they were entombed in wax, and we did wax
Oh,
molds
yeah.
of figures and had all of our clothing
Yeah.
like that. So it was pretty great, but there were a lot of people in the establishment who just thought, what are they doing?
And how do you know that?
Because
Because you just know.
It was written.
And
there were comments like that would be written, like, how long would that last? Blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. It's like, well, we've evolved into who we are today.
Yeah.
We don't have a collection Mercy anymore.
Mhm.
We still make clothing, but we don't have a per se collection. So, but 1994,
Yeah.
2024, 30 years,
30
we're
years
still
together.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Still,
phenomenal.
like,
Yeah.
we're still here.
hmm
So they obviously taught us something at this place we're from, AKA where we're from. But,
Yeah.
we had like, and that's a really, I think, and I said to Jennifer tonight, we should probably mention like how important it was. Like, it's great. Oh, you're so inspired and da-da-da. But where did you, and obviously you're an able person, you know how to do things, but where did you figure out how to do things correctly?
hmm
And that was here.
That was here at
That was here.
TMU,
Yeah. That was
formerly Ryerson.
Yeah.
Right.
And I turned down York and I turned down Concordia and I had to wait a year, and I can't tell you other things, to come here. I wanted to come here. And we learned how to do things. And to this day,
To this day,
like,
we
we're
still do our
like,
own production
We're
sewing.
kind of like analog people because
Yep.
we're from a different time of this place. But it's like brain, idea, eyes, hands,
Engineering.
like creative engineering
Right.
Yeah.
is design.
Because you had the creative drive.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fashion from the beginning for both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
and
yeah.
you wanted to learn the technique. And now what about the culture of the school at that time? Did it contribute to your guerrilla approach?
I
yeah.
want to say something quick because when I first came here, it was known as Ryerson Polytechnic Institute of Technology, and that's exactly where it started. By the time I left in '92, it had already just become Ryerson, whatever it was,
University.
and it has evolved. It has changed from what it was like in the '80s and '90s, and it's not. They're not teaching analog form of fashion.
Sure.
They're
It's
teaching
it's
like,
evolving with
high
the time.
tech, whatever
Right.
you
Yeah.
call it. Like, what's the
But the
point?
industry's changed
What's the point? I had a
Well,
point.
I was
had a
wondering.
point.
I was asking if the culture of the school at that
Oh.
time contributed to the guerrilla
Well,
aspect of your
Well,
trajectory.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, it was like leaving, going away, experiencing something in a different country and coming back, because you have a different perspective of like what people, from different countries. But here at the time, because Ryerson was really like teaching you to do this or teaching you to do that. So the tree was like, we only knew the tree having two major branches. But
Well,
in
sorry, what are
fact,
those two
Which were
branches?
design.
Which is design or merchandising.
Okay.
And those two branches still exist here, I imagine, in the way that they teach. But what we've learned, like when we were doing the film work, I was like, we thought that what we had to do was walk down a runway and be fashion designers. But actually, we could have been costume designers.
From the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we
It
didn't,
wasn't
like,
something that occurred
no,
to you.
we
at
were
the
like,
time.
No.
we must walk down a runway.
Mhm.
It was so narrow, like that would be being successful. We must be like Marc Jacobs. Well,
And
yeah.
yet you walked down a different kind of runway.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
A
we-
runway you made yourself.
Yes. And
Which is kind of guerrilla marketing.
Yeah. And also being open to new opportunities and believing that you could maybe do something quite different
Mm-hmm.
by using your experience.
And you know what I think, which I now this is just talking, like
Well,
when
this is-
going
yes.
back to money, right?
Yeah.
That I feel, and it's my opinion, I think we both share this opinion, that now this industry is like, you kind of need to have money to be in it. If fashion industry, you need money. It's an expensive.
Is there a level of money, like it's expensive, but is there still, like let's say I don't know what ranges of money we're talking about, but is there still a level of money that gets you in the door but still requires you to be...
I don't know, but often people say like, oh, my daughter or my son wants to get into fashion. I'm like, oh God, don't, it's so much work. It's really hard. But how about this? Be in fashion. This is what I'm thinking currently.
Mhm.
What if you like concentrate in this area, which is like the film industry? That's a big industry in Toronto. It's like big here and there's money, I figured I think for me, it's like, that's a place where I don't think, maybe I could be wrong, where you don't really need the money, you need the talent. And I think if you have the talent, you can go places because you're super talented. You can go as far as getting an Academy Award.
Right.
And that has happened.
Right.
to a designer, a costume designer in Toronto.
Sure. I mean, within film,
There's a wider net of opportunity.
everybody that contributes to a lot of people that contribute to films are really it's their own little project, and you're given the flexibility and the freedom to actually contribute your creativity and your design.
Yeah.
And it's also important to like re-mention that, as we work slightly in that area, as almost like we're the technicians. Like we will give you design ideas, how to accomplish what you want, but we're not taking on the role of the designer.
That's right. You're given a vision.
We build an idea.
They're coming to us to say, solve our problem, make our stuff. And that was the same with
tomorrow.
That's the same when we were working with Estee Lauder for MAC Cosmetics. It was like they presented the creative, and then we had to figure out how do we make that happen.
Right. So you're applying more problem-solving, creative,
which is kind of like,
which is still creativity. It's not the pie in the sky. This is what I'm imagining.
Engineering is problem solving. Design is creative problem solving. So if the problem is, hey, we got no money, make it happen.
Right.
Spin the straw into gold.
So let's go back then again to your origins, because this is really fascinating for me. At the time, you decided to create your own shows with a shoestring budget, but doesn't sound like that was even really, that probably contributed to the creativity. What did that experience, or how did that experience contribute to your trajectory to where you are today, opening the boutique and now working in the film and television?
All right. When it went to like Mercy and then evolving into Gaspard, that again was another shoestring budget. Like there wasn't actually enough money to open the store, but somehow we did. And you know what? If you don't have enough money, you better have a lot of elbow grease. And you better be ready to do literally everything, whether it's painting or sweet. Like you have to do all of it.
Jennifer has her hand up.
I think to your point, Lewis, it was always about honing our skills of intensive sourcing. We are very skilled in that and spend like copious amount of hours before a job even begins sourcing. How are you going to make this vision a reality even before you start spending any money?
Right.
And that's why we were successful with the Estee Lauder campaigns, because they were like, here is a sketch of what we want. Here are the colors for this collection. Go and make it happen. And we would go to an illustrator, make beautiful illustrations, and figure it out from there.
Right.
And of course, the reality is, big company waving big carrot of money. And the big carrot of money would then allow us to do other things like travel to whatever or open the store. So it was always that was like the source of money that would feed something else.
Those are the pies that are juggling
film
juggling
is the
around.
Source of money. Maybe it could be as boring as paying rent or your income taxes, or it's, traveling and visiting a mill somewhere. I don't know, whatever it is. But it's like you had to do it because
You've kind of described two opposite processes here. Thinking back to the guerrilla fashion shows, you had no money, but you had the energy to create a scope where, from whatever was available. And by the way, City of Toronto right now is filled with empty commercial spaces.
I bet.
Well, that roller rink was it was on Jarvis Street. It was the new terrace that never got opened. Now it's, I think, an early childhood thing, but it was an empty concrete, brutal shell that never became the roller rink. And when we're talking about like, oh, we're so great and we did all this work, we also had a lot of friends helping us.
Yeah.
Sure. That's part of your budget. That is the replacement for money.
I mean, we are kind of control freakish and do everything ourselves, but we also had a lot of help.
So between the two, between the sort of the guerrilla, low money scope heavy in terms of freedom versus the here's a lot of money and our vision and figuring it out, do you prefer one over the other? It just pure experience wise, or
The thing I preferred about working with someone like Estee Lauder was the ability to source and work with lots of different talent to learn about new fabric mills.
Oh, and they're a huge corporation. They
Yeah.
made it look really professional.
Right.
Our stuff looked really professional because they, but even when we in the early days of like, oh, let's continue making collections for Mercy. So like in the late 90s, like 1998, 98, 99, whatever, like we were like, let's take this, essentially garbage fabric and turn it into fashion. I mean, people were doing it. It's a bit sort of on the whole idea of deconstructivism, right? Like, oh, we'll just use muslin. And, there were companies like Comme des Garçons doing that. They weren't using the most expensive fabrics. In fact, they were using maybe sometimes the least expensive, but they would then have to use their creativity and turn essentially like, generic nothingness into something that was runway ready, approved. Definitely it was editorial.
Right.
Definitely it was worth taking a picture.
So between the guerrilla fashion shows
or guerrilla collections
yeah, and
or
your
guerrilla store
and your guerrilla store,
yeah,
and your work, with Estee Lauder and other companies, what do you think you've covered the gamut, or is there another version that you haven't explored within sort of the fashion sector or industry?
Well, we're starting to go back into making our own clothing again in small runs, and I'd have to say I really love it again after not being able to do it during COVID. And
is it informed at all by your experiences since you stopped doing it?
Yeah, it's informed by travel and the desire to want to do it from not being able to, really.
Right.
Now, obviously, we're rusty and it's frustrating, but, we're getting through it, and stay tuned for more to come on that front. But it's a lot of work, and it's hard what makes it exhausting is it's really hard to produce clothing in Toronto. It's not really, like the services that you need that existed back when we were doing it as a collection, they've gone.
Yeah, many people
especially
folded during COVID.
after COVID.
Yeah.
They were just like, I've had enough. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Done. Right. So it is hard. It is hard, and it's an industry that exists. Like Toronto, like Montreal, and these like New York were cities that had garment industry in them, but our city has evolved. Those are kind of like old analog-y industries. And those people that used to work in that industry don't exist anymore.
Right. Do you feel that there is still that culture of within Toronto fashion, and you can, say I prefer not to answer that question, but do you feel that there's still that expectation of up and coming fashion industry hopefuls to follow a specific path?
I bet there are. I bet there are. I've seen some examples.
I'm not sure, but I hope that up and coming people know that the industry is not what it was when we started.
But I've seen examples of those people.
Yeah.
Like I saw something, I don't know what it is, but I saw something and it was like, oh, they're doing things different. And we're like, basically, we're kind of like dinosaurs. Like we're from a different time. So
what about working with people that, you're very hands-on. You like to, you have your processes. Do you want to work with people that can contribute to and do the work that you typically do, and sort of take a step back and say, okay, this is what I want you to do? I'll kind of be the Estee Lauder in this scenario.
I don't think I would ever want to do that. Creatively, I'd like to be selfish and make the things on my own.
All right.
But I think the thing is, like, for me, is like, when just like you just speak a different language or dialect, it's like I don't even know. Like I'm just too like not in the know.
Right.
Of like what's really going on, because we just do it the way that we were taught and how we've evolved to where we are now. But then when we're gone, there'll be room for someone else, and they're probably having their own guerrilla version of something in their own lives. We don't know.
Right.
But,
well, I got to say, I mean, you've had a beautiful journey of 30 years. I wish you another 30 years.
of new ideas.
Of new ideas, creativities, new ways of approaching your work, maybe even new ways of presenting your work or and imagining your work. I mean, it sounds to me like, it is the case that you used the constraints throughout your career in different ways and as you had to. And it's actually a really interesting journey. So I appreciate you spending the time with me and sharing your story. Constraints the Podcast receives resource support from the Alan Slate Radio Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University and is co-produced by Louis Moroney and Mihir Kore. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts to automatically be notified when a new episode is posted. Also, follow us on Instagram at constraints_podcast. Constraints the Podcast is brought to you by Hi-Fi Handiwork. Sound advice.